Let's break down 5 running backs and 5 wide receivers that are set to absolutely go off in week 6 of 2024 fantasy football. These are players that we cannot bench this week because they have great matchups, extreme upside, and they are going to go nuclear approaching week 6 of the season. Before we do so, let me remind you guys that Underdog is the place you want to be if you want to get in on additional fantasy football action all season long. Their week 6 pick'ems are already live, and Underdog is giving all new users who sign up with promo code THECATCH a free Brock Purdy over half of a total yard pick'em to use towards tonight's game. And don't worry, if you watch this video later in the week, you're going to get a free Joe Burrow pick'em to use towards Sunday's action. On top of that, Underdog is giving all new users who sign up with promo code THECATCH a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. It's a free pick'em for week 6 and up to $1,000 in bonus cash on Underdog when you sign up with promo code THECATCH. That link is down below. First and foremost, we're going to kick the video off with Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons on the road this week facing the Carolina Panthers run defense. This is the defense giving up the most fantasy points to the running back position in the entire league. And I'm still getting questions about what to do with Bijan Robinson going into week 6 as he's had 13 or less fantasy points in his last 3 starts. And the answer is you start Bijan Robinson, especially against this Panthers unit. I can't believe we're even questioning Bijan Robinson. I know he's been frustrating in fantasy football. I know some of you guys, have deep overall rosters right now. And even though you drafted Bijan early in your drafts, you might be questioning him, but there's no reason to. He's the RB22 in fantasy football right now. He still has had 10 or more fantasy points in every game on the season. I know he's had just 1 touchdown. I know the usage has been super frustrating, even with Arthur Smith gone. But this Falcons offense has been improving each and every week. And I know it doesn't really matter if the offense is improving and they're not incorporating Bijan Robinson enough, especially from a fantasy standpoint. But this is a week with a matchup that you absolutely cannot ignore. This could be one of Bijan Robinson's best games of his entire career. So if you are a Bijan Robinson owner, yes, you're playing him this week. Don't overthink this one. This matchup is way too good to ignore. Next up, we have DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears, who will get the Jacksonville Jaguars run defense at home. DeAndre Swift, 20 or more fantasy points in his last 2 starts, 16 or more touches, and 9 total receptions, as well as 2 touchdowns. Swift has been on fire the last 2 weeks, and we've also seen involvement from Roschon Johnson, and that has not held DeAndre Swift back. And I've talked about this stretch of games for the Bears running backs for at least a week or 2 now on the channel. Week 4, the Rams. Week 5, the Panthers. And now week 6, the Jacksonville Jaguars. There's no reason why this 1-2 punch of DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson should be slowed down in any fashion here in week 6. This Jacksonville Jaguars defense is bottom 8 against every offensive position in fantasy football scoring right now. They've been abysmal against the run. They just got torched by the Colts with Joe Flacco and Trey Sermon. DeAndre Swift, who's the RB16 right now in fantasy football, is in line for another fantastic start. I really won't be surprised if he puts up 20-plus fantasy points in this game. And like I said with Roschon Johnson, who was a nice sneaky start this week, he's had 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games, 2 against the Panthers, 1 against the Rams. And honestly, he hasn't had a ton of involvement. 7 touches in week 4, 10 in week 5. Not bad, but nothing crazy there. So, I mean, really, you think if Roschon Johnson wasn't part of this equation, Swift's numbers would be even higher. I know the start of the season was super rough if you're a DeAndre Swift owner, but he still is averaging 13.8 fantasy points per game. Great matchup. He stays in our lineups. There's no reason why this pace for DeAndre Swift is going to slow down here in week 6 against the Jaguars. Except we've got David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions, who will face the Dallas Cowboys on the road this week. Now, I feel like most people who own Montgomery are starting Monty every week, but I also have gotten a lot of questions already on the week. And I feel like part of this is coming out of the bye week and you kind of get used to other maybe flex options or RB2 options or whatever. But David Montgomery is a must-start player every single week. He's currently the RB12 in fantasy football. He didn't play last week. Jahmyr Gibbs is the RB13. So Monty has more points on the season than Gibbs. Monty has a touchdown in every single game on the season so far. Just a true model of consistency with 15 plus fantasy points in those first 4 games on the season. And now he gets the Dallas Cowboys run defense that has been a little bit better over the last 2 games in comparison to their first 3 games of the season, but they're still very bad, giving up the 28th most fantasy points to the running back position so far on the year. So Monty, coming out of the bye, if you're looking at your flex options this week, if you're a little bit deeper at running back, if you're looking at who maybe you should start, you've picked up guys along the season, maybe like a Chuba Hubbard, or you got a guy like Rico Dowdle starting to kind of blossom. It doesn't matter. David Montgomery is a starting running back or a very solid flex option for you. Don't get confused coming out of the bye. He is a must-start player this week, and this matchup is going to be fantastic for him. We've got another stud on the list, and that's Breece Hall, but Breece Hall has not felt like a stud as of late. 6.7 fantasy points in week 5, 3.8 in week 4. But I want you guys to take a step back here, okay? He has had 18 or more fantasy points in every other game on the season, and he still is averaging 14.3 fantasy points so far on the year. And I don't think all of this is Breece Hall's fault. The play calling has been really bad for the Jets, and I think things are going to get better this week against the Bills on Monday Night Football. It's a home game for the Jets. A lot going on with the Jets right now with head coach Robert Saleh being fired, and now there's there's all kinds of rumors, but there are some rumors that the play calling might be taken away from Nathaniel Hackett, which I think would be a good thing. But even if we take everything out of the equation here, this is just a fantastic matchup. The Buffalo Bills have been awful all season long against the running back position, giving up the second most fantasy points of any team to the position on the season so far. So Breece Hall is in a great bounce back spot. And for those of you worried about Braylon Allen, he really hasn't been that much more involved. I mean, some people are kind of looking at it like he's taking away too many touches, but Braylon Allen does 5 touches last week, 1 reception. The week before, 8 touches, 1 reception. Now, the thing is, Breece Hall in the last 2 games hasn't seen a lot of volume either. 10 touches in week 4, 5 targets, 2 receptions. And in week 5, 9 touches, 4 targets, 3 total receptions. So the usage for the running backs the past 2 weeks has just been kind of weird and very low volume for both. But this is still Breece Hall's backfield, and this is a smash spot here in week 6. If you're thinking about Breece Hall being on your bench, don't do it. He will bounce back this week and have a great fantasy performance against the Bills in week 6. So confident in Breece Hall that I would head straight to Underdog and take the over on Breece Hall to score a touchdown, had a rushing or receiving touchdown in each of the first 3 weeks of the season. I think he gets right back on track here in week 6 against this awful Bills run defense. So make sure when you guys head to Underdog that you sign up with promo code The Catch to get your free pick 'em for the week. Take your free pick 'em, take the over on Breece Hall to score a touchdown, automatically triple your cash entry. And while you're doing so, Underdog is going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 when you sign up with promo code The Catch. That link is down below. All right, last running back I want to mention is Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I do want to say, of course, I'm always careful for the most part about chasing points after one big week and picking up a player off the waiver wire and looking at just one good performance. Not that Tank Bigsby has been bad when he's been giving touches in other games on the season. 12 touches, 73 yards in week 1, 7 touches in week 4, 90 yards. But week 5 was what really felt like, this might be the breakout game for Tank Bigsby. 13 touches, 101 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and he had that big reception for 28 receiving yards, 25.9 fantasy points. So the kind of elephant in the room is the fact that even if Bigsby's been the better runner, Travis Etienne is still going to be involved. He's still going to get touches, and he's still going to have involvement in the passing game. He had 7 targets and 6 receptions last week, for example. Now, Etienne is dealing with a shoulder injury and has missed at least 1 practice on the week so far. So maybe something to pay attention to, because if Etienne doesn't play, then Bigsby becomes a smash play. But I still think Bigsby provides a nice floor this week against the Bears, giving up the 10th most fantasy points to the running back position so far on the season. It's a good matchup. Chuba Hubbard just had a great game last week against this Bears defense. And I'm just kind of riding the copium here. I like Tank Bigsby. I feel like he's going to have a good game. I'm in on Tank this week. This is just one of those things where you now have a player who either you held on to as kind of like a handcuff or a stash, or you got him off the waiver wire. And I think we plug him into our lineups as long as you're not taking out like an absolute stud or anything like that. I think he's a really good flex, a good RB2 if you're in a kind of desperate spot. I think he has a lot of upside this week and a great matchup against the Bears on the road. The nice thing with the Jags is their defense is so bad that their offense consistently needs to try and stay in the game. I think Bigsby's going to have a solid performance here in week 6. Along to wide receivers, let's talk about DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears, coming off of his best fantasy performance so far on the season. 27.5 fantasy points against Carolina, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 105 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. He's currently sitting as the wide receiver 18 and averaging 15 fantasy points per game. But when you look at his overall ceiling so far on the season, he only had between 10 and 15 fantasy points every game until last week in week 5. And I don't think that pace is going to slow down whatsoever this week against the Jaguars. For now, this Jaguars defense is a team that we are starting just about any offensive player against until further notice in fantasy football. Now, when we look at what wide receivers for the Colts did in week 5 against the Jaguars, Michael Pittman had 14.7 fantasy points, Josh Downs had 15.9, and Alec Pierce had 22.4. So while some of those aren't crazy high ceilings, the production definitely there for the wide receiver position last week. And, there are other guys here like Roma Dunze and Keenan Allen, of course. But I think DJ Moore just comes in here and has another very solid fantasy performance. The floor is so safe with DJ Moore this week, but the ceiling is still there. And I don't see any reason why his ceiling would be lowered against this awful Jaguars pass defense. So you own DJ Moore. Don't overthink it. He's an incredible start this week. He should absolutely pop off once again here in week 6. Next up, we've got Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, who's going to face the Washington Commanders at home. And I'm expecting points in this matchup. This is a matchup for the week that I really like. We got, 2 really unique quarterbacks in this matchup. It can be really, really fun to watch. And I think the wide receivers in this matchup are going to benefit from the fact that both secondaries for the Commanders and the Ravens have struggled on the season. The Commanders secondary did look better in week 5 overall, but Deshaun Watson was throwing the football. Now, we get Lamar Jackson throwing the football, and if week 5 was any indication of what we can get out of Lamar Jackson, then this is probably not good news for the Commanders. And Commanders are still giving up the 29th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position so far on the season. When it comes to Zay Flowers, he's averaging 11.9 fantasy points per game. And some people were kind of panicked in weeks 3, 4 with 5.3 points and 2 points for Zay Flowers, but he just wasn't necessary in those games. He had 2 of the worst run defenses in the Cowboys and the Bills, and you have the best rushing offense in the Ravens. He just wasn't necessary. Then we got a good game script last week where the Ravens needed to throw the football, and he got 12 targets, 7 receptions, 111 receiving yards, and 19 fantasy points. In games where Zay Flowers has 10 or more targets, he has double-digit fantasy points on the season. So I think this is going to be another one of those game scripts where we're seeing both teams throwing the football, keeping it competitive, high-scoring game. Zay Flowers going to benefit, If you own him, he should stay in your lineups. There's no reason why a stat line similar to last week does not happen here again in week 6. Sticking with that same matchup on the other side of the ball, and I'm going to say Terry McLaurin is a player who needs to stay in lineups, and I think we could see potentially Terry McLaurin's best game of the season. This Ravens secondary is just not good. This defense is good against the run, but they are really struggling against the pass, which is something we usually don't see out of a Ravens defense, but we are. And the number one wide receiver has been playing really well. I mean, against this defense, just look at what Jamar Chase did last week, but then you could even say, look at what T. Higgins did last week. Both of them absolutely balled out. A little bit of a unique game script. I don't know if we're going to see that many points this week, but like I said, I still think we're going to see plenty of points and both quarterbacks playing very well. McLaurin's a wide receiver 24 right now in fantasy football, averaging 12.7 fantasy points per game. 13.4 or more fantasy points in his last 3 starts, either a touchdown or 100 receiving yards or more in his last 3 games as well. So he's been on a great pace as this offense has started to kind of gel, and Jaden Daniels really getting into the thick of things here and really starting to elevate as a passer. McLaurin's the number one guy here. He's going to get all of the volume. Fantastic start. Love this game script. Love the matchup. Love everything about Commanders-Ravens game this week. And McLaurin's going to see Carolina next week. He's just going to continue to be a really solid start. But don't overthink it. I know the ceiling hasn't been extremely high so far on this season. Week 3 felt good with 20 points, but then we got 18.2, 13.4. I think we might see McLaurin's best game of the whole season yet. Do not bench Terry McLaurin going into week 6. And I am all for Terry McLaurin's receiving line right now on Underdog, sitting at just 59.5 total receiving yards. He has hit that in 2 of the last 3 matchups and barely missed it against Arizona. So I absolutely love this line for McLaurin against this awful Ravens secondary. Don't forget, sign up with promo code THECATCH. That link is down below. Get your free pick 'em for the week. Pair it with this Terry McLaurin receiving line. Automatically triple your cash entry. And while you're at it, Underdog is going to give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. Next up is Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons, who will face the Carolina Panthers on the road. And like I mentioned earlier, I do want to be careful about chasing points. Mooney having his best fantasy performance of the season in week 5, 31.5 fantasy points, 16 targets, 9 receptions, 105 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. And once again, we're just not going to see that same game script where Kirk Cousins is, throwing the football nearly 60 times and for over 500 passing yards and double digits to both Mooney and London, or maybe I should say, 30 plus fantasy points to both Mooney and London. They might both hit double digits against this Panthers secondary, and that's part of the point. This secondary for the Panthers has been very weak. The run defense is so bad that sometimes it kind of gets overlooked that this secondary is also extremely bad, giving up the 24th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So Mooney sits as the wide receiver 16, averaging 15 fantasy points per game so far on the year. And he does have a little bit of a volatility, 2.5 points in week 1, but none of the Falcons offense played well in week 1 against the Steelers. 8.6 fantasy points in week 4 against the Saints. Their defense has been pretty stout on the season. Outside of that, 17.8, 14.6, and last week, like I said, 31.5 fantasy points. So it's a great matchup, divisional game. The Falcons are going to come out here and they're going to have their foot on the gas. They're going to be trying to score points against a divisional opponent and secure a dub. Mooney, a player who's now sitting at 81% rostered overall, is a very solid start. I think he could absolutely pop off once again this week. He should not be benched moving into week 6. Last player I'm going to talk about is Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Cardinals, coming off of his second worst performance of the season with 5.6 fantasy points, 7 targets, 2 receptions, 36 receiving yards. Definitely a down day for Marvin Harrison Jr., but also a down day for Kyler Murray throwing to MH Jr. So I think he bounces back against the Green Bay Packers, and we maybe do want to pay attention to the health of Jair Alexander. Could be back for the Packers, could make this a tougher matchup for Marvin Harrison. But, overall, this Packers secondary has been good. They've been getting plenty of turnovers, plenty of interceptions, but they also haven't been good. They've been giving up a ton of total yardage, to the wide receiver position, total pass yardage. So they kind of struggle, but then they find a way to get turnovers, and it kind of makes you think, oh, this Packers secondary is really good. They do have the most turnovers in the NFL, but they're also giving up the 26 most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. So all we care about is the fantasy side of things, and this unit has struggled against the wide receiver position, and they are allowing for good overall game scripts like we've seen against the Rams and the Vikings in the last 2 weeks. So I think this is a good spot on the road for Kyler Murray to kind of bounce back. He didn't have an awful game last week, but didn't have a great game throwing the football against the Niners. And it's definitely a good position for Marvin Harrison Jr. to bounce back and get back to that double-digit area, right? So I think if you own Marvin Harrison Jr., just don't overthink this. He's the wide receiver 13 right now. He's still averaging 13.8 fantasy points per game. Yeah, we haven't seen that ceiling like we saw in week 2 against the Rams, where he, had just 4 receptions, but 2 receiving touchdowns and 29 fantasy points. But this is a great matchup. Don't overthink it. Don't react to the bad stat line last week. He stays in our lineups as we approach week 6. And that'll do it for today's video. Don't forget, guys, I'm answering all fantasy football questions in the comment section down below. So if you guys need anything whatsoever moving into week 6 of the season, drop a comment. I'll answer every single comment on this video before Thursday Night Football and before Sunday's slate of games. Don't forget, guys, we have everything on the channel that you guys need to dominate week 6 of 2024 fantasy football. Start sits at every single position, kicker rankings, must-start defenses, waiver wire additions at the beginning and the end of the week, buy low, targets, live fantasy Q&A streams, everything that you guys could need to bring home a dub every single week of the season. So make sure you guys are subscribed so that you don't miss out on any of the content. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.